And just a little bit about how we came to do the guide to Socotra. About 2 years ago, there's a brief memo on the Bradt publishing agenda saying Hilary is going to a place called Socotra. She thinks we ought to do a guidebook. She thinks someone would buy it. Just 48 pages. Well, we went with quite a gaggle of people who were here, totally fell in love with the place, decided that we couldn't possibly just do 48 pages, and it grew and grew. We knew very little, but by the end of the writing we knew a lot because so many experts came to our help. And I think you'll see from these photos that it is an absolutely extraordinary island. We were correct to fall in love with it and to do a guidebook. We don't know when we'll be able to come back, or anyone will be able to go. But it's a lovely place to live in your dreams. I'd thought of going, dreamt of going for 40 years, and finally got there. Janice came too, although she was definitely too old to go. Of course, it's all camping, but let's show you why it's so magical.
Can I just say, we're talking about the people who came with us, and we're going to be talking to them and about them quite a lot, I think, during this. Do they just want to put up their hands so that anybody who wasn't them will know? That's right. If you want to know what it was like, objective information, ask them afterwards.
And also, other hands, of course, a lot of people here have been to Socotra. This is a unique Socotra gathering. So hands up anyone else who's been there, our gang plus. It's pretty impressive. You're not going to get as many people who've been to Socotra in other gatherings. Right. Okay, I'm going to start with just what an extraordinary place it is. And we've said, and other people have said, it's like a fantasy film set. And just looking at these pictures will show why it's so special. I got interested in it, like many people, because of dragon's blood trees, and they are extraordinary. You say they're like darning mushrooms. Most people here are too young to know about darning mushrooms, but they did used to look like that. It's barely the size of Cornwall, but has these impressively high mountains, 1,500 meters. It has extraordinary sand dunes round the edge, both in the north and the south. It has the most beautiful azure seas, I mean, absolute cliche, white sands, azure seas, no crowds at all at the moment. And it has bioluminescence, which I'd never seen before. We didn't see on this trip, but Chris, who took most of these photos, saw it, and I would love to see it. I've seen it in other parts of the world, but not in Socotra. And this is Janice's slot, because she's the one who does history and stuff.
You can see, there is Socotra. Now, it's in such an extraordinary strategic position, because you've got the Suez Canal, you've got Yemen, mainland Yemen here, Oman, United Arab Emirates here, Somalia here, Cape Gardafui. It's got access to all of these. So it's a great prize for ambitious neighbouring powers who would love to have it as either a military or a strategic base. There's talk, unsubstantiated at the moment, of joint Israeli UAE information bases from which they can keep an eye or an ear on Pakistan, China. We don't know. A big wall has been built down at the tip here.
We'll have a better map.
We'll have a better map
but
in a minute.
This cartoon shows what you're talking about.
Ah, yes. Well, this tells you what's happening. They would all love to draw it to their country. That's a temporarily ex-governor. It's being fought over, fundamentally. And to give you an idea of what there is on it, Hilary was talking about sand dunes, massive sand dunes, there and there. The bioluminescence was there. This tip is where the Indian Ocean meets the Arabian Sea. You could stand there and see where the two seas join. This is where a military post is being built. When you look at the outline on the map, it already looks very much larger than Cornwall because there is a lot going on. But it is quite extraordinary that within this small frame, it manages to pack an enormous amount. Momi plateau, forest in the middle, sand dunes around the edge, mountains in the middle. It's very, very, very varied for its size.
So we were here only 6 days. I mean, it's outrageous to write a guidebook after a 6-day visit, but we did get a lot of expert information. It should have been 7 days, but we were stuck in Yemen, mainly mainland Yemen, for a night, through dubious reasons that we won't go into. But this is Socotra International Airport, and this is the great city of Hadibo, which I think everyone who's been to Socotra would agree is one of the most unappealing capitals you could visit, but it has little bits of interest. It has some quite nice shops, very typical shops anyway, where you can get stuff. It has vegetables.
These are interesting because here you've got a mixture of what's grown locally and what's imported. The potatoes and the onions are grown locally, and there are apples here. Some look like tomatoes, but there are apples. These had been imported, and they were approaching $1 each. They were ridiculously expensive, and the oranges also had been imported. There were local dates here. It's a complete mixture of what has been brought in from outside and what is grown locally. Not a lot is grown locally for two reasons. One is that there's a cyclone season which wipes out a lot of vegetation, and secondly they have goats. And the goats are everywhere, and the goats eat everything, which is why not a great deal of food is grown locally.
And what anyone who's been to Hadibo knows about Hadibo and the rest of Socotra is the rubbish problem. And you can see here, I mean, that's a normal street scene. It is dreadful. It's not effectively dealt with, and it probably can't be effectively dealt with, except by these chaps. And their nickname is the Municipal, and they do a very good job, Egyptian vultures, in clearing up a lot of rubbish. And also these chaps, the goats. I mean, they eat masses of plastic. I don't know why people aren't doing research on the effects of plastic on Socotran goats, because they eat quantities of it and seem to thrive on it. And if all else fails, there are tourists. We did very effective beach cleanups when we found a lot of plastic on the beaches. And actually, if all visitors did that, it would help quite a lot.
Local people do as well, it's worth saying. On that particular beach where we've been picking it up, they do organise litter picks every so often. They're not neglecting it. It's just a massive problem for them.
And just looking at the fauna, Socotra is quite often called the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean, and I think actually that's a bit misleading. Apart from die-hard birders, one of whom is there, who will find even an LBJ absolutely wonderful, there aren't that number of very exciting endemics. But if you are a bird watcher or a reptile watcher or whatever, there's a lot of endemic species. But compared to the Galapagos, it's different. It's the plants that are exciting rather than the birds. But non-endemics, this I told everyone confidently was a Socotran starling. It isn't, it's a Somali starling, but I was quite happy saying it was Socotran. They're very, very similar, but from the name you can tell Somali isn't endemic, but the Socotran one is. Here's one of Frank's pictures. That is a very beautiful endemic bird. That's the Socotran bunting, and he is gorgeous. He looks like a humbug, and very nice. And this is another pretty endemic, the golden-winged grosbeak, isn't it? Golden-winged grosbeak. And since I'm very rude about birds, this is your archetypal LBJ, little brown job, Cisticola, as boring as anything, but turns a lot of people on. And the endemics in Socotra have excited researchers for centuries. And the Victorians, of course, loved collecting butterflies. It was a big thing if you were Victorian. And there were several expeditions to categorize the butterflies of Socotra. And the researchers all got very cross with each other. And there was this butterfly, a papilio type of swallowtail, and it bears the name of Bennetti, Mr. Bennett, who discovered it, and they were very scornful about Bennett. Later, Ogilvy Grant came to Socotra, and he was just about to net one of these, and it escaped, and he got so cross he shot it, which isn't a very effective way of collecting butterflies. There's a lot of endemic reptiles. This is a Socotran rock gecko. And one of my favourite reptiles, actually my favourite reptile without any competition, is any sort of chameleon. And this is the Socotran chameleon. I didn't see one. Did you, Frank, when you were there? Oh, you would. Yeah, okay. It's not fair. Lovely. Chameleons are very exciting. And you wanted to say something
No, it's all right. Local people don't think so. Local people don't like this. It hisses when it's upset, as they do. And they believe that if it hisses at you, you then risk losing your voice. So if you want to maintain your voice, keep clear of those.
And I would have loved to have seen one of these, a blue baboon spider. This is endemic, but its genus occurs elsewhere. And what a beautiful creature. Sigh. Another eight-legged creature. This is endemic. This is the Socotran freshwater crab. And they're lovely. If you bathe in the freshwater pools in the waddies, they come and nibble your toes. And the ghost crabs, which are found all over the world, but they're so endearing and they're such fun. And they build these crab cities, which you can see in the north of Socotra. And it's just like Donald Trump, you know, they're building these high-rise places to impress their rivals, and they pose in front of them to impress a mate and their rivals. And I just love that photo. It shows how small the sanderlings are, the birds, or how large the ghost crab is. And still on the fauna, there are coral reefs in the north of Socotra, quite small ones, but very undisturbed ones. We unfortunately had such rough weather, we were never able to snorkel. But it looks, from this photo, you think it's just a pebble beach like in Devon. But that's what's under your feet. And it is amazing. I mean, it's just solid, bits of coral, shells, everything marine. And you're crunching your way through, and you're crunching away on cowrie shells and lumps of coral. It's really spectacular. And this was in the north, and these are little pufferfish exoskeletons, and there were thousands and thousands of the poor little things. And if you're a pufferfish, if you're in danger, you blow yourself up, and that's not very good if you're being swept in by a cyclone. So thousands of them obviously perished.
Apparently the waves coming in, they just had swarms of these little things almost floating on the crest of the wave. They've got very sharp spines, because I remember, Matthew, you were getting them stuck in your flip-flops, weren't you?
Yeah,
Spines.
they went right through the flip-flops.
Yes.
Yes. And we love pufferfish. And another place we went to, Detroit Lagoon, they were scooped out of the water. And this poor little chap, I mean, we still feel unhappy thinking about it.
Look at its smile.
Looked at us with quivering lips. Actually, what it was doing was getting rid of the water that had blown it up. But it was dribbling and quivering, and we were very unhappy.
Terribly upsetting. I haven't got over that.
And here are two different species, but again, scooped up. They were all put back. But,
Wonderful face.
I know. They are very endearing. The good thing about the flora is it doesn't move, and so you can find it. The guides know where to find it. The cucumber trees are very, very ancient. They're the only one of the family, the gourd family, the cucumber family, to be a tree, and you were going to...
They're so ancient that it's thought that they were on the islands, the potential islands, before they actually broke away from Gondwana, so many million years ago. So that is a very, very old species there.
And Socotra is famous for its frankincense trees, of which there are about 7 or 8 species.
And just look what it's doing. It's clinging. It's got specially adapted roots so that it can just crunch itself into a sheer cliff like that and hang on somehow. They're extraordinary. These are endangered, and there's quite a big drive on the island now to protect them. And there are some wonderful women who have really stepped out, and they've got tree nurseries going. I mustn't make it sound as if there are a whole lot. There are very few, but they are determinedly replanting frankincense trees to try to keep them going.
And they brought wealth to Socotra, didn't they, for millennia? I mean, from the Roman times.
Yes. Oh, yes. 1st century BC. Apparently, Socotra's frankincense was perfuming the bathhouses of Rome. It's really been going for a very long time.
And myrrh. I mean, it's very biblical that no gold, but frankincense and myrrh.
Yes, no, it gives great value to the island, actually. If you've got the frankincense and the myrrh, as you say, no gold.
And some fairly spectacular plants, a succulent. This is endemic, that one isn't, but it's so showy and so beautiful. And bottle trees. We are all totally in love with bottle trees. All our group will immediately have a great ooh with thinking of the bottle trees. They're so anthropomorphic. I mean, that one, I don't think you've got the pointer. Yeah, it's like someone trying to climb out of a sack.
There's a hand there. That hand has reached right up, you see, and there's the second hand just trying to get out. You imagine this sack bulging as it tries to... And
then bellies on
bottoms or bellies.
Yes, and buttocks and just gorgeous. We love them.
Our guide was trying to make himself scarce while we were all giggling at that. He was quite embarrassed. I don't know if you saw that one day.
And yes, you think that's like 2 legs.
Oh, it's something. Their heads in the ground and they're waving their legs in the air desperately.
And the proper name is desert, when I say proper name, the official name is desert rose, which is completely inappropriate. It doesn't look like a rose and it doesn't grow in the desert. It grows mostly higher up. But they do have pink flowers, so sort of rosy. And its scientific name is, and I've forgotten the first part, something obesum.
Obesum, the second half of it is obesum, so these are officially obese desert roses, as they are.
And there again is the bioluminescence. It's just such an amazing phenomenon. And now we talk a bit about places rather than things. And you're going to talk about this place.
Yes, well, things as well, because here's whales among all the other wildlife that Hilary has described. This is the far eastern tip of the island, and it's an extraordinary place. I found it probably one of the most evocative places, I think, on the island. It's where the two oceans meet, as I pointed out before. But it's also, it's bare, it's empty, it's this thrust of land sticking out into the sea. And on during the storm season, there have been a number of shipwrecks off this coast. And actually a tiger was shipwrecked. And this is I had to dig around for this story, but a little further up the coast, a little bit slightly to the west of here, there was a German ship bringing a tiger up from India to Berlin Zoo, and the ship was wrecked off one of the reefs off this shore out in the distance, and the passengers presumably got off, because there's no record of the tiger having consumed any of them. And the tiger chose not to, and fortunately for the villagers, it didn't try to swim ashore, but very unfortunately for the tiger, because it was seen pacing the decks and it died of starvation, and the villagers, when they finally ventured on board, found one dead tiger. But what I have no idea about is whether it had any connection with Life of Pi, whether he might have heard this story, and whether it might have just triggered a memory somewhere. I don't know. But anyway, this is where a tiger... And there was another dreadful shipwreck. It made a whole page in the Times at the time, at the end of the 1880s. And that was a British ship. And I think they lost 68 lives. But what was terrible was that it was wrecked. It was broken up. The surviving passengers were stuck inside this broken hulk for many days, with potential rescue ships sailing by thinking, oh, nobody will have survived that, and just sailing on and not believing it was worth mounting a rescue. So there have been some quite dramatic shipwrecks of
What about the very gentlemanly one?
No, that was in the south. That was during the time of the Aden Protectorate, when the Socotra was being administered by the British. And this was a ship, and imaginatively the captain had run it ashore. He knew it was sinking, and so he saw a sandy beach and rammed it so that it couldn't actually sink. And they were there for, I think, almost a month, because it was so badly holed, it couldn't be got off. They needed to be removed. And one morning they awoke, and there was a helicopter coming over from Aden across the water, and a man was let down on a wire. And he delivered the morning papers and went away. But this was during the time of the British, remember, so it makes sense.
So, just a reminder of where everything is. We're going to be talking about sand dunes, so do you want to point out sand dune places?
The sand dunes again. There are big sand dunes here. The sand dune Aher there is the one that you're going to see most particularly, which is one of the biggest. This one also, there's a big sand dune at Delisha, and this a lot of navigators will have seen, because as they sailed down in from the north, they will have been heading for the anchorage here, and they will have seen this great white thing leaning up against the cliff, because these are not flat sand dunes, these are ones which drift against the cliffs.
So that's just introducing a subject. Here we are in Aher, which one of the extraordinary things about the sand dunes here is fresh water sort of comes out apparently from the middle of the dunes. It's quite extraordinary because they're really very high. They vary in height, but they were pretty high when we were there. I think 400 metres?
It's up to, I think 300 is more realistic probably.
And I was very sensible. I sat at the bottom on a chair with a cup of sweet tea and watched the rest of the group labour up the hill.
All of whom are here,
resorting to hands and knees. Una, who's in the front, is carrying something to slide down. It didn't work, did it, Una? No, but it gave you something else to do, climbing up with it. And that's not one of our group, because none of them took photos at the top, but that's what it looks like at the top, a nice knife edge.
It was dark when we got there.
It was dark, that's right. I was a bit twitchy by then. I thought I'd lost half of them.
Julian went as well.
Yeah, that's right. So then we go to Sahek in the south, and we didn't really see as much of this as we would have liked, because Chris's photos are quite amazing, particularly this one. I mean, it's so biblical, isn't it? You expect three wise men to come over the brow of the hill.
And we climbed the dunes almost high enough to turn round back and look towards the land and see that. Matthew, did you see that? Because you climbed quite high up the dunes, I think.
Yes, no.
You didn't turn around?
Nothing
No.
like that, no.
No, it's
I did turn
extraordinary.
around, but I didn't see that.
No, and it's beautiful.
I think it was one of those things, we didn't know what there was to
No.
see, so we didn't try and see it. But what we did see was Camels. It's a camel place, it's where they browse, and that leads nicely into the camel trek, which we didn't do. You need to be there for a fortnight to do the camel trek. But Chris did it, who took the photos, and it does look absolutely magnificent. If we go back, and if I'm strong enough, I would love to do that. The camels carry the luggage, and it is a very tough trek, apparently. But you're getting right up into the mountains, and you're seeing the rugged Socotra that you don't see otherwise. And he had this very variable weather, which did make for beautiful photography. And it's just, again, you have to think, this is barely larger than Cornwall, and yet it looks more like the Dolomites.
There were Chris stopping off in Bedouin settlements up in the hills, and they are called the
Yes.
people who live in the interior, who were the original inhabitants. Waves of incomers came after that. But they're called the Bedouin, and we think of that in the Sahara Desert sense of trekking long distances with your flocks. But they don't. They're just moving them around from pasture to pasture with their goats or their cattle or their sheep, whatever it may be. They're pastoral people called Bedouin, but all within one area. The children go to school within the area. They own property in the area. They're not nomads.
And yes, you have these deep chasms with the wadis, which produce lovely freshwater pools for swimming, and very refreshing and very beautiful. And the Firmin forest, the dragon blood trees, and that's the iconic scene of Socotra. It's what, if anyone knows anything about Socotra, they think dragon blood trees. And they are quite bizarre, aren't they? Because they're spiky on top, not leafy. And this is what a baby dragon looks like. And when we saw it in a tree nursery, we said, no, that can't be a dragon's blood
Can
tree.
you go back to the slide before, Hilary? You see, that little tuft there is really what the baby dragon is when you go to the next one. When you Yes, it's like that. And somehow they manage.
Somehow they manage if they're not eaten by goats, and
Yes.
that's why you need the nurseries.
Yes, yeah, indeed. They have to be protected by goats until they're, well, that one's safe. But when they're smaller, the goats enjoy them.
And for millennia, the locals have collected the sap, the dragon's blood. We bought some crystals. I still don't know what to do with it. I tried putting it in clay and using it in my sculptures, but it disappears. I think if I was a gladiator, I would paint it on my wounds, but I'm not. So
No, this was what it was used. One thing that it was used for, again in ancient Rome, it was painted on gladiators as a disinfectant and also a decoration. There's somebody in, I think, Saudi Arabia now, and I think a royal family, who grinds it up in milk as an aphrodisiac. But that might be apocryphal.
Well, we've got it. Yes, they're the crystals. But that is mixed with milk as apparently to help after childbirth. So they mix it, it has medicinal properties, perhaps, and mixed with milk, taken after childbirth, it helps to stem the bleeding, so they say. Socotra people, do you want to talk a bit about the people?
Lots of different faces because of lots of different waves of settlers coming in. Very cheery. They're having an extraordinarily tough time just now. And looking at this gang here, you wouldn't believe it, but poetry, historically, is very important to them. And it's absolutely beautiful. And just these small lines here, I'm going to read you a bit of a Socotri poem, which is 2 lines. Sweet is it when the pastures are safe and free from fear. Sweet and peaceful then is sleep. And it's lovely, gentle stuff. And there's a book coming out next year. Google Socotra poetry and you'll come across it. Yes, he's more, as one imagines, a Socotran would be. Again, quite a different profile from the ones in the first picture. But a great mixture. There's always been quite a divide between the people in the interior and the people who have settled around the coast. So in the interior, the original inhabitants, who date back, incidentally, the first ones came in prehistoric times. We don't know, no one knows exactly when, but they left, there are stone tools, there is cave art. Cave art, if you're interested in it, just Google cave art Socotra, and you will come to a very good article written in 2 years ago by Julian Jansen van Rensburg about the cave art of Socotra with illustrations, and it's wonderful. And there is one cave which is yet to be fully explored, which has got treasures in it, really very old, but we're playing that down because it's too vulnerable just now.
And I think talking of vulnerable, it's the Socotra culture that's as much at risk as the natural world, isn't it?
It
From
really
the
is.
power struggle at the moment.
Yes, because again, we've got the UAE moving in, and it's a bit bread and circuses. They've been doing things to entertain the population, so that they've had jolly festivals with so-called traditional sports, which are not traditional to Socotra, they're traditional to the UAE. So there is a feeling that the traditional culture is being diluted. The language is at risk, because Arabic is dominant. And this is the same on the Yemeni mainland as well. There are 6 ancient languages, spoken languages rather than written ones, so that it's difficult, more hard to protect them. All at risk, all being diluted or swept aside. So yes, people are aware of this. Local people are terribly aware of this and are really trying to keep their culture going.
And the women are much shyer than the men, completely covered up. You're not allowed to photograph women unless they ask you to, but that's one of Chris's photos.
I love this photo because it epitomises the uncertain future. Where are they going? What's going to happen to them over that hill? It's vulnerable just now.
Because they were quite spunky. We met someone working in tourism, didn't we? And she was very forthcoming.
Oh, we met a lady dentist.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
She was terrifying.
Who was she was very frightening. We thought we'd have our teeth out any moment. No, the women, once they find their voices, they're really spunky.
Mm.
And interestingly, there are women on the mainland, Yemen, protesting against the invasion of the incomers on Socotra at the moment. So they don't demonstrate the same day as the men. There's a men's demo and then a women's demo, but they're still quite vociferous.
And here are some people. He was longing to have his photo
Yes.
taken. He rushed forward with his twins, who were less keen.
Yes.
But
This was in Calensia, which is the second city.
yes. And kids absolutely everywhere play with tyres and hoops, don't they? It's a lovely universal thing. And kids everywhere play football. I love the goal here. I think it's very sweet, and the goalie. And they're learning to pose in front of their very pretty painted metal doors.
And the little girls do wear long dresses as well.
Yes.
And not just because she hasn't grown into it. They are genuinely long. Not so many in this picture, but we saw quite a few.
And Calensia, you wanted to say something about...
It's interesting. We saw Hadibo, which really could have been anywhere, but this is a much more traditional style of building. And the bricks, which are local, are really very carefully chosen to give a pleasing pattern when the place is built. The colours are shaded together well. It's really, they look plain, but it's worth looking at the buildings.
And the painted doors, which are really the prettiest things about the cities or towns, I think. Hom Hill Plateau, somewhere any of you who get to Socotra will go to the infinity pool, which is absolutely beautiful. I don't know how long it's going to last in its beauty. I mean, as soon as more tourists go to to Socotra, there were already another group there, wasn't there,
Yes.
when we went?
Yes, and yet another one coming round the side of the hill as well there.
But it is absolutely magical, and it really is an infinity pool. Beyond it, there's a complete drop-off.
And this, incidentally, is an illustration of why you do need to go through tour operators when you go there. It's not good for do-it-yourself travel, simply because one of these days, all the single do-it-yourself travellers are going to end up at one place or another, or at one campsite or another. It needs to be controlled, and they are subtly doing this within Hadibo. The tour operators are keeping an eye.
It was very windy when we were there. That's the rest of our group. I think I chickened out of it. And another place everyone will go to, if you can do the hike up there, which is quite tough, is Hot Cave, which is fantastic. It's really so interesting. It's got cave art, which you're not allowed to see, which is a good thing. This, I think our guide said that it reminded him of a minaret. We thought it reminded us of something else. but the most fantastic stalagmites, stalactites, and just completely uncommercial. You know, I think a lot of us have been to caves where all the stalagmites are given names, and it's, you know, it's all very commercial. You walk along this incredibly slippery surface, falling over at intervals, unless you're propped up by a very nice Socotra man, as I was. And it's a challenge, but it's really lovely.
It is a difficulty, and one reason that a lot of it is off bounds to tourists is that artifacts have been looted, and quite valuable old material was taken from the inside, the furthest reaches of the cave, and so tourists are now not allowed in there, but still it happens.
And finally, the last bit, the west, which is, there's just one place that everyone goes to, otherwise the west is fairly empty, but it's the most beautiful beach, probably one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And you take a boat trip from Detwa Lagoon, which is gorgeous, to Shewa Beach, which is absolutely heavenly. You're accompanied by spinner dolphins, which weren't spinning for us, but they spun for other people. And we've commented that the sea was so blue that several of us thought we were seeing some extraordinary seabird with a turquoise breast, and it was the sea bouncing off the breast of a gull, just reflecting off it. And that's Shewa Beach. We just had a few hours there just to stroll around, have a swim. Chris was able to camp here, and again, I don't think this sort of wild camping can be permitted for much longer if there's a lot of tourism. It's just too difficult for the environment. But what a gorgeous place to camp, and what a gorgeous place to have a campfire. And if you're into stars, what a wonderful starry skies you get there. Absolutely amazing. We slept in big tents. They call them nests. And they were pretty comfortable, and we were given mattresses, and we had chairs to sit on, we were given tea, we had pretty good meals. We didn't suffer too much. You know, when you think of camping with no facilities, we were a bit nervous before we went. And here we are, us gorgeous women. We did cover up in Hadibo because it's a courteous thing to do.
We were warned not to display our buttocks. So we...
The bottle trees could, but we couldn't.
Yes, we couldn't. So I think after a certain time they become less appetizing anyway. So we all had very baggy trousers.
So that's fair. That's the penultimate slide. Just gorgeous Socotra, and a poem. Do take a little time just to read the poem. It's beautiful, isn't it? That's the culture that could be lost if there's too much power grabbing. And that's the end of the slideshow.
Put up the map.